President.
The senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, first I want to thank both the senator from Rhode Island and the senator from Utah for agreeing to the way we worked this out so we could all have our time to speak on the Senate floor. I appreciate it very, very much. Mr. President, extending unemployment compensation benefits is one of the most important things, vital things, that we should be doing right now in Congress, both for the people who are unemployed but also for our economy. Our economy is improving slowly. There are still 20 million Americans either out of work or marginally employed who want to work. Now, almost 4 million of those have been out of work for over 6 months. So faced with this reality, it is reprehensible that Congress failed to extend federal unemployment benefits at the end of last year, 3 days after Christmas. So to correct this failure, last week the Senate began considering a bill intended to extend those benefits. And I wholeheartedly support this effort. As our economy makes steady improvements on the long road to recovery from the Great Recession, we should continue to support our fellow Americans who are out of work through no fault of their own. The way to do that is to restore a federal unemployment insurance program for the long-term unemployed. But to garner the votes needed to pass the unemployment insurance extension, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle insisted that we find a way to, quote, pay for it through cuts to existing programs, cuts that one columnist for the Los Angeles Times said were Swiftian in their absurdity and cruelty. I refer here to an article that appeared in the January 10th issue of the Los Angeles Times by Michael Hiltzik, H-I-L-T-Z-I-K. It's titled, "An Awful Idea, Hammer the Disabled to Pay for Unemployment Benefits." The first paragraph says, "It would take the pen of Jonathan Swift to fully describe Congress's willingness to beat up on the least fortunate members of society to protect the richest. The latest example is a plan to pay for a 1-year extension of unemployment insurance by cutting Social Security benefits for the disabled." Now, first of all, I want to say, Mr. President, I do not believe that an extension of federal unemployment insurance benefits needs to be offset. We've done it before. We did it under the Bush administration, and we've done it before, and it's always been an emergency. Just as if a hurricane hits or a terrible storm. Well, this is a terrible storm for people who are unemployed for long periods of time. And quite frankly, the recent budget deal that we just passed reduced the deficit by $25 billion. So initially, I disagree with having to find extra money. But if the other side's Republicans say, no, we have to find offsets, well, I guess I'm reluctantly willing to do so. However, Mr. President, the proposal before us would do so in one of the most pernicious ways possible. I guess the most positive thing I could say about it, it is comparatively less damaging than some of the amendments that have been filed by my Republican colleagues. But understand this. The proposal before us to extend unemployment benefits and to, quote, pay for it, what it would do is it would deny individuals who have a disability and who are receiving Social Security disability insurance, it would say that if you get unemployment compensation, that your disability payments will be reduced dollar for every dollar you get in unemployment compensation. Now, that's bad enough, and I'll get into that in a second. Amendments filed on the Republican side would go further, and they would say that if you get $1 in unemployment compensation payments, you would lose all your disability rights, all your disability payments, and all your Medicare support that comes along with being approved for SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance. Now, the proponents of these policies say that people with disabilities who receive disability insurance payments and unemployment compensation payments, they say they're double dipping. They claim this is a loophole, that somehow people who receive both are scamming the system. This is not true. This is simply not true. SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, is designed to address the needs of people with disabilities. Unemployment insurance is designed as a partial, temporary replacement of income for people who've lost jobs through no fault of their own. They're two separate programs. Two separate programs with two separate designed benefits. And it is possible for an individual to be eligible for both. Well, how can this be? First of all, we have to disabuse ourselves of what we keep hearing here on the Senate floor from my friends on the Republican side. They keep talking about disability insurance as though if you get Social Security disability insurance, then you're unable to work. Again, that's not true. That is simply not true. SSDI is set up as a system to give you some support while you look for work or you get a job and supplement that. Under the law, people who qualify for SSDI, Social Security Disability, I'll just say disability, people who qualify for disability insurance can work and are encouraged to work. And they can make up to $1,070 a month without losing their SSDI. Now, why is that? Why is it? Because we want people to work to the best of their abilities, especially when they have a disability. People with disabilities also want to work. Now, keep in mind, the SSDI program, Mr. President, is not a freeloader program. FICA taxes. You know, Mr. President, when you work and you get a paycheck, they take out FICA taxes. That's Federal Insurance Contribution Act, the Federal Insurance Contribution Act, FICA taxes, three parts of it. You pay to an insurance program for Social Security, old age and survivors, indemnity insurance. So when you get old, you get a check. That's what most people think of as Social Security. The second part is hospital insurance, Medicare. The third part is disability insurance. Now, if you don't work and you haven't paid in your FICA taxes, you don't get SSDI. Listen to this. An adult becomes eligible for disability insurance compensation when they have worked at least 10 years. And at least 5 of those years, you have had to have worked at least 10 years and at least 5 years prior to getting Social Security disability. And you have to have earned at least $4,800 a year. At least earned $400 a month for 5 years before you even qualify. So this idea that I keep hearing about, oh, someone works for 4 weeks and then they go out and file for disability and then they're on disability for the rest of their lives is nonsense. That's not true. And yet you just keep hearing these stories going round and round. You have to have worked 10 years and you have to work 5 years prior to receiving it. You have to have worked and made at least $4,800 a year before you even qualify. Then let's say you do become disabled and you file for disability. What's your chances of getting it? 1 out of 3. For every 3 persons who file for Social Security disability insurance compensation, only 1 out of 3 actually get it. Why is that? You've got to go through a long evidentiary process, a medically evidentiary process. And administrative law judges can send you back to get for their opinions. So it's not something you just file for and you get it. Only 1 out of 3 qualify. And so that's why, Mr. President, if a person works and pays taxes, your FICA taxes, and that person is laid off, if that person is laid off, they can get unemployment. But if they also qualify for disability insurance, they should get that if they paid into the system. People with disabilities who work and pay into that system can also be eligible for unemployment compensation. Why shouldn't they get that? Listen to this. If we deny people with disabilities their right to the insurance they've paid for, we are discriminating against a group of people in a way that no other group is singled out. In other words, we are discriminating against you just because you're disabled. How do you like that? Is that what we're about? We're going to discriminate against you just because you're disabled, because if you're not disabled, you won't be discriminated against. If you're not disabled, you'll get your unemployment compensation. You might even be eligible for some other government programs, Section 8 housing or something like that. We don't take that away. But God forbid, if you become disabled and you're working, you're disabled, you get a disability check, you go to work. You can work up to $1,070 a month, and you're working, providing a little bit of extra income so you can live independently, maybe provide a few things for yourself. But you, and only you, if you get unemployment compensation, we're going to take away your disability payments. Only you, nobody else. Nobody else is denied their full unemployment compensation. Only people with disabilities under the bill that we have. Let me provide a real-life example of what this means to a real person. I'll call him Henry. This is a real person. Henry lives in the District of Columbia. Henry has a disability. He's deaf. And he has other health problems on top of being deaf. But Henry worked. He worked for 10 years. He worked for 5 years. He paid in. And then in his 30s, because of other health reasons, he couldn't continue to work full time, so he went on disability and qualified for it. So he's on disability, and he's making $740 a month on his disability insurance. $740 a month. Well, he can earn up to $1,070 a month, as I've said, under the law, and still get that. So because he couldn't work part-time, full-time, but Henry likes to work. He wants to work. He wants to be a productive citizen, Mr. President. So he went out and got himself a part-time job consistent with his disabilities. He makes $950 a month. So you add $950 and $740, he gets $1,690 a month. Big deal. But I can tell you what that $1,690 does for him. It allows him to live independently, allows him to provide some payments for a support system, allows him to sign up for cable TV, allows him to go see a movie once in a while, maybe even go out and have a hamburger. $1,690 a month. Now that's what Henry was doing. Henry became unemployed. But now mind you, every month he worked and made $950 a month, he paid in. He paid into his FICA taxes every month. Now he gets unemployed. Well, what happens? Well, he went on unemployment compensation, and he gets $520 a month. So he gets his $740 on disability, he gets his $520 on unemployment, he gets $1,260 a month. Well, a little over $400 and some dollars less than what he was getting when he was working full time. But still, $1,260 a month allows him to live independently, allows him to support himself. Under the amendment that's in this bill, here's what happens. He gets his $520 in unemployment, but his disability is reduced to $220 a month. Now Henry is getting $740 a month. What's he going to do? He won't be able to afford his apartment, let alone have cable TV. I don't know if Henry has cable TV. But $740 a month. No other person working in America and paying in their FICA taxes is treated like that. No. And they still aren't unless this amendment is adopted. And then we will discriminate against you simply because you're disabled. I mean, you wonder what people are thinking about. Yes, I have compassion for those who are unemployed. I'd like to see our economy being improved a little bit better. We ought to extend unemployment benefits, but not at the expense of people who are on the lowest rung of our ladder. People with disabilities who have paid into the system and who become unemployed. Henry wants to work. He wants to work. He wants to make that $950 a month. Pernicious? Pernicious. That's just a fancy way of saying this is abominable, that we would even consider such a thing. That we would even consider it. Henry's not double-dipping. He's not scamming the system. He's not a slacker. He's not defrauding anybody. He's only getting what is rightfully his because he paid into the program. If people with disabilities are earning income, as Henry was, and paying into the disability insurance program, they should be eligible for that just as any other citizen who paid into that program. Again, to do otherwise would be to discriminate against someone just because they're disabled. Mr. President, one of my proudest moments in my history here in the Senate, indeed in the entire Congress, is when I stood on this floor as the chief sponsor of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. When we passed that and President Bush signed it into law, the cheers went up. 25 years after the passage of the great Civil Rights Act of 1965. Because that was sort of the Emancipation Proclamation for people with disabilities. And because of that law, we have encouraged people with disabilities to work. They want to work. Now we just want to break down the barriers, provide for accommodations and transportation and ramps and widened doors and all the other things that make it possible for people with disabilities to get a job and go to work. Change the system. Oh, I can remember when we had the hearings, we had people come in and testify, well, employers said we'd hire people with disabilities, but sometimes they don't show up for work and this and that. And well, I looked into it and found out they couldn't get the bus. They couldn't get on the bus because the bus wasn't accessible. How are they going to get to work? Couldn't drive, got a wheelchair, can't get on the bus. So we changed it. We made the buses accessible, the metros accessible, everything's accessible now. And people with disabilities are working and they want to work. But now we're saying to them, you can work. Like Henry here, you can work and you should and you can make, and you can get it. If you qualify for disability insurance, you can get your disability insurance, and you can make up to $1,070 a month because we would like you to work, you want to work. But if you pay into that system and you become unemployed, you're going to go, like Henry, from $1,690 a month to $740 a month, simply because we're discriminating against you. What kind of a signal does that send? That's why this provision is opposed by members of the entire disability community. ARC, the National Disability Rights Network, the National Organization of Social Security Claimants Representatives, American Association of People with Disabilities, and on and on and on. And I ask unanimous consent that a letter expressing opposition to this proposal from these groups be included at the end of my remarks, Mr. President. So,
Without objection.
So as much as I support extending unemployment insurance for the long term, we shouldn't, as this article said. And by the way, I also ask consent that this article from the LA Times appear at the end of my remarks also, Mr. President.
Without objection.
As I pointed out, you hammer the disabled to pay for unemployment benefits? It just, you sometimes wonder. Now look, I want to be clear about one thing. I don't ascribe bad motives to anybody in this body. Not in the least. As a matter of fact, I am told that there will be a motion to strike this provision when we vote on this, on the cloture on this tomorrow. There'll be a motion to strike this provision, and that's good. And I hope it's generally supported by everyone here. So I don't ascribe bad motives, but what happens is sometimes we don't think these things through. Someone starts this thing and says, oh, they're double dipping, they're scamming the system, and all of a sudden it sounds, oh my gosh, yeah. But when you look into it and you examine it and you find out that, wait a minute, these people have been paying in their FICA taxes. They've been paying it in. And yet you're saying just because you're disabled, you don't get it if you become unemployed. I just don't think, we were busy around here, you look at different things, so there's no bad motives on any part. But I want to take the floor to set the record straight and to let everyone know just what's at stake here. Do we really, truly want to discriminate against 117,000 Americans? That's the General Accounting Office said in a study done a couple of years ago that there were about 117,000 Americans at any one time who are getting disability insurance and also unemployment. Now, again, if Henry's health improved and he were able to get a full-time job, he wouldn't get his disability. He would go back and start earning money full-time. So are we saying that somehow we're going to take away their incentive to work? Take away their incentive to work? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's just one of those things that comes up and people say, well, they're double dipping and they're scamming the system. And no, that's not what's happening at all. That's not what's happening at all. They pay into the system. It's insurance. They paid for it. They ought to receive it. And they shouldn't have their disability payments reduced because they're getting it. Two separate programs. So, Mr. President, I hope that two things happen. I hope we can get cloture on the bill to proceed to extend federal unemployment benefits. But I also hope that all my colleagues will see the error of this amendment, of this part of it, and move to strike it. It's fundamentally, it's the only right thing to do. It's the only right thing to do. So I hope we'll do that, and I hope that we'll begin to take a look more and more at disability insurance, what it means, how it operates, the fact that the notion that somehow if you get disability insurance you can't work, that is not true. You can work. If you're able to work, and you can earn up to $1,070 a month without losing your disability payments. So I hope as we go forward we'll begin to shed more light on this and have a more enlightened discussion. on this program and how it operates and why it's so essential to ensure that people with disabilities are not discriminated against in a manner that no other part of our society would be if this provision were left in the bill. So, Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
There is a tweet here to our guest, two parts. Why is our guest not in the administration any longer? Why did you leave? First question.
Well, it was an incredible honor to serve, and I wouldn't trade the experience of working for President Obama and Secretary Gates for the world. But I do have three kids who I wanted to have them recognize me when I walked through the door. Two of them are about to leave for college, and this is very precious time to have a little more time with my family at this point.
The second part of the tweet is, what do you think of Robert Gates? But we have a clip from the former secretary from the Today Show just this morning when asked about the Afghanistan surge. Here's what he had to say.
It was in our private conversations that he would express these reservations about whether it was working. But the decisions were right, and I believe that he believed it would work.
And as you, but
let me just say, Matt, I mean, in a way, it parallels President Bush in 2006, when President Bush began to have reservations about whether his strategy in Iraq was working.
What do you make about what you hear there, but the overall idea of this book coming out and then the critiques from the Secretary?
Well, let me just say that since the book has not been available to anybody but journalists yet,
right.
I haven't actually had a chance to read the final version in its entirety. So I want to be, I don't want to say much on that. But I think, you know, what you heard from Secretary Gates just now is that, you know, I think what was interesting to me serving both President Obama and Secretary Gates is more often than not they agreed on policy, particularly in the case of Afghanistan strategy and the way forward.
And Gates defends the book's critique of the president. This is a Washington Post headline. He was on CBS's Sunday Morning yesterday and spoke about it. He defended his criticism of the president's handling of the Afghanistan war while the president in his office. He said, quote, "I don't think waiting till 2017 to weigh in on these issues and in a comprehensive and thoughtful way made any sense." That's Robert Gates there. Moving on now to Elizabeth in Maryland. Is it Pomfret, Maryland?
Yes, good morning to you.
Go ahead. You're calling on the Republican line. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yes, thank you so much for your service. I wish we had more women of your capability and your capability and your caliber.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. But what I wanted to know is that early on I was able to attend. They would kind of take people about 20 minutes and let them see some of the hearings on the attacks on 9/11. And so I've tried to keep up with it through the years because I'm not hard over either way.
Without objection.
I should ask Senate proceed to pre-morning business centers allowed to speak up 10 minutes each. Without objection.
I now ask, Mr. President, that we proceed to S-Res 331.
Clerk will report.
S-Res 331, congratulating the Florida State University football team for winning the 2014 Bowl Championship Series National Championship.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion be considered made laid on the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to Senate Resolution 332.
Clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 332, congratulating the North Dakota State University football team for winning the 2013 National Collegiate Athletic Association Division I Football Championship Subdivision title.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion reconsider be made and laid on the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes the business day, it adjourn until 10 a.m. Tuesday morning, January 14th. Following the prayer and pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired. Adjourned proceedings be approved to date. Time for the two leaders be reserved for use later in the day. Following any leader remarks, the Senate resumed consideration of S. 1845, unemployment insurance extension, with the time until 12:30 equally divided between the two leaders or the designees, and that would be controlled time. The majority control the first 30 minutes, Republicans the final 30 minutes. Further, the filing deadline for secondary amendments to S. 1845 be at 10 a.m. Tuesday. At the Senate recess from 12:30 to 2:15 to allow for our weekly caucus meetings. And finally, the time from 2:15 to 2:30 be equally divided and controlled by the two leaders.
Without objection.
I ask consent that the deadline for filing secondary amendments be 11 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Without objection.
And that's on the unemployment compensation bill. So there could be two roll call votes tomorrow at 2:30. There's no further business to come before the Senate. I ask that it adjourn under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
The Senate today confirmed Robert Wilkins to a seat on the Federal Appeals Court based in Washington, D.C. He was previously a federal district court judge in Washington. And senators continued work on legislation to extend emergency unemployment benefits. Majority Leader Harry Reid announced procedural votes on the legislation tomorrow afternoon.